Hello, and welcome to the Hero Report podcast. It's been a long time. We shouldn't have left you. But we're back. My name is Ari Cohen. I am a professor of political science at the University of Nebraska. With me, as always, my good friend Matt Langdon. And we're joined by an old friend of the podcast, although I should say none of us are in the same place we were in the last time we had this podcast together. So that's very exciting. I am in sunny South Florida, although as you can see behind me, it is now nighttime. It's nighttime because we are accommodating the schedule of our friend from Down Under, formerly of Michigan, and we're here with the artist formerly known as Drew Jacob, but on his journey south of the border, now known as Andre. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Art.
That was my most involved introduction to date.
We forgive you.
I've been saving it up because we haven't had a chance. We haven't had a chance to talk in a long time. Internet being what it is in Australia.
That is the problem.
But we've all got our headphones on, so I think we're ready to let's get ready to podcast, right? We have a lot to talk about, and because it's nighttime in my world, I'm going to try my best to stay awake while we talk about it.
That's a big promise.
Yeah, I'll do what I can. So Matt, what's up?
Well, we've had, it must be months since we last spoke, and all sorts of things to talk about. But recently, Andre, or as our readers remember him, Drew, our listeners, viewers, has started getting back into the subject of heroism on his blog, and he suggested that we should revive the Hero Report, or HREP, and talk about some different approaches, I guess, to pursuing heroism. So maybe you can tell us where you got this, where this came from, and the basic premise, and we can jump into it from there.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my basic project, as it were, in life, is that by following the footsteps of the great heroes, of legend, we can start to understand something of what it was that drove them, and what makes a person heroic, and how one can be ready to take appropriate, take heroic action if needed in the real world. And for me, that's meant looking very closely at what exactly do all of the hero stories have in common. And for the vast majority of them, that involves an adventure of some kind. An adventure can be many different things, but it often involves a long journey away from home and incredible challenges that you're not necessarily equipped to overcome when you first encounter them. You have to improve yourself in some way in the course of overcoming in order to succeed. So my personal adventure that I've put before myself is to travel across 2 continents, from my home in the United States to the Amazon River in South America, powered only by my own body. So I've been bicycling most of the way so far. I paddled part of it in a boat, maybe walking parts of it, and that's kind of my own personal project. And that project has brought me, really close to the research and the kind of emerging ideas about heroic imagination, where people, no matter what it is they're doing in life, if they can imagine themselves being heroes, if they can identify with their heroes in literature or in movies or games, if they can picture themselves doing the same things that those heroes do, then it turns out they actually are, more well equipped to act heroically if there's a reason to do so in the real world. And that's raised some interesting questions in the wake of the shooting at Isla Vista in California, where Elliot Rodger killed a number of people, including his roommates and a number of women. He stabbed some, he shot others, and then eventually shot himself. There's an interesting theory going around by a scholar named Roger Griffin that he was acting out of a delusion of being a hero himself. And that idea, as soon as I read it and as soon as I shared it with Matt, kind of chilled both of us, because it sounds eerily similar to the heroic imagination that we think of as a good thing, sort of taking a dark twist and going horribly wrong.
So what is the premise there? What can you describe that idea of his heroic self-image?
Yeah, definitely. So I just want to be clear that this theory is not my own personal theory. This is a theory advanced by Roger Griffin, who's sort of one of the world's foremost terrorism experts and anti-terrorism experts. And originally he voiced this theory in relation to whether Elliot Rodger, the Vista killer, is a murderer, just a killer, sort of the way that we usually think of a criminal being, or if we should really think of him as a terrorist. And Griffin's theory is that because Rodger, he certainly killed a number of people, but he didn't just go out and kill people who he thought had wronged him. This isn't like shooting somebody for money, or shooting somebody for revenge, or shooting somebody when you catch them with your spouse or your boyfriend or girlfriend. Rodger was out there shooting women who he didn't even know and had no personal grievance against whatsoever, because he had felt rejected by so many different women in the course of his life and felt so powerless that he wanted to send a strong message to womankind. They just can't treat him like this anymore, and that in his twisted view, that they just can't treat men this way. And so because he wasn't killing individuals who had wronged him personally, or that he wanted something from, but was killing women at random in order to send a message more broadly to womankind, Griffin believes that essentially makes him cross over the line from being a killer to being a terrorist, whose acts of violence are meant to send a message and to change the way that the general population behaves. So that's kind of where Griffin's theory comes from. But in the course of explaining that theory, he goes into a lot of detail. One of the interesting things about this tragic case is that Elliot Rodger left us a large number of videos and an entire manifesto in which he explains in detail exactly why he did what he did, and explains his motives and a lot of the things he was feeling in his life. And it's a pretty icky body of evidence, but Griffin does a great job of sorting through it. And he shows several kind of chilling things. First of all, that Rodger felt essentially a sense of isolation. He was very lonely, and that he felt like he had no power in life. He felt very inconsequential. And through all of his videos and his manifesto, you can start to see that he's building a fantasy world for himself, where by doing this, by carrying out this grisly mission against women, that he becomes important. He doesn't just send a message, he also becomes the lead player in sort of an epic struggle where true men have to strike back and show that they can't be dismissed and belittled. That was the mythos that Elliot Rodger put together in his head, and he was living that mythos when he went out instead of actually killing people. So he really did view himself as the hero in a struggle, and that his heroic struggle had some greater meaning. He actually thought he was taking action on behalf of justice and was the one that everyone should be applauded for.
So, I mean, you just said it. He saw himself as a hero who was bringing a positive change to a repressed group of people. That his actions were going to make the world a better place, and so that's where you see the similarity. So, how do we separate that from our encouragement for people to live their life heroically or as the hero of a story? What's how do we make that distinction?
Well, I think that's probably the most important thing to take away from any sort of character study of somebody like Elliot Rodger, is that this is actually a very different impulse than the impulse to act heroically. when we talk about a heroic imagination in a positive sense, we're talking about the ability to, to look at heroic actions in the real world or in fiction, and to start to think about whether we could live up to that and do the same thing if needed. And so, almost by definition, a healthy heroic imagination is a response, a reaction, trying to fit ourselves into the world around us. What Elliot Rodger was doing was the direct opposite of that. He wasn't trying to fit his own struggles into a messy, difficult world. He was trying to make the world fit himself and what he would like to make it look like. And he didn't come from a place of sort of trying to cast himself in the role of real heroes and try to live up to what they had done. He came from a place of trying to make everybody else around him live up to what his expectations were. And so the heroic imagination that we see at the center of heroic studies right now and the psychology of heroism is generally a positive force that helps people be more ready to take action and to be more pro-social in their outlook and to pay closer attention to the needs of others around them. Whereas what Rodger was doing was the opposite of that in every possible way. He was thinking only about himself and was not evaluating in any way what other people's needs or rights might be, and imposing his will on those around him was his way of making a fantasy come true.
I think he could make an argument that he was acting on behalf of all these other men, right, who feel that women have got some power in today's world, etc., that they're holding dominion over men and withholding sex and all of this kind of thing. So, how do we differentiate there? Is it his actions that are the concern? Is it what's the difference between someone like him and someone like a civil rights activist who was fighting for a change in the world on behalf of an oppressed minority?
Well, I'll jump in really quick and then I'll send it back over to you. It seems to me that's the easy move to make, isn't it, Matt? Right? We just say we look at the action and say that's the. You can't compare this to the kind of civil rights, actor that you mentioned, because the action that's undertaken is so radically different, right? Here's someone who, as Andre is saying, indiscriminately kills, right? In that sense, where this, becomes a terroristic action, there's no way to suggest that this is a heroic endeavor. Isn't that the simple move to make?
Yeah, that's absolutely. I think so. And it's it was indiscriminate. It was killing as a solution, as if killing people is going to make people sympathetic to your cause. It just, I don't know. Is there any history of that?
And seemingly as a first potential solution, right?
Right.
I have a grievance, and the first thing, well, that's not true, right? From what I've read, the first solution was to attempt to indiscriminately injure people, right? He went to some party or something and attempted to just randomly toss people off a balcony or something. Maybe I'm getting my facts wrong or something, but that didn't work out for him, and so then the second, I guess, solution was to indiscriminately shoot people. It seems to me, but I want to turn this back over to Andre, who's thought I think about this in a really nice blog post, and so I would like to hear more about why we don't. Maybe it's not quite so simple as the way I'm casting it, right? That you just look at the action and that's enough to tell you that we don't have to go any further.
Well, I think that the actions that somebody with a healthy heroic imagination takes versus the actions that somebody with a hero delusion takes are definitely going to be different actions in a lot of ways. I think we need to be careful to look at it on a sort of a subtle level. It's not necessarily that people with the heroic imagination will act in nonviolent ways and that people with the hero delusion will act in violent ways. And I mean that in both levels. Somebody with hero delusions may never act violently. They may just simply live in a fantasy world their whole life without ever actually taking that dramatic action that Elliot Rodger took. But I also mean that in the other way. I'm very skeptical of violent solutions to any problem, and I certainly think in a democracy like ours, which has a good, transparent rule of law, it's pretty rare that the violent solution is going to be the right solution. But I don't categorically deny that sometimes a hero is going to be somebody who has to take up arms. Certainly there are cases in our own history when that's been the case, and we think of many revolutionaries and freedom fighters in the past as being heroic, although their solutions were, inarguably violent. So I don't know if it's necessarily a violence versus peaceful solution case. I do think there are some very specific signs and the kinds of actions people will take that can indicate whether they have hero delusions.
But not indiscriminate violence, right? I mean, isn't that where we draw a line? It's not terroristic violence. It's not violence that targets randomly, right? That targets civilians or what have you, right? And I mean, this is a conversation I find myself frequently having with students when I teach courses on the Middle East, right? And I ask them, is there a way to define terrorism at all? Or is terrorism simply in the eye of the beholder? Isn't it as simple as saying military targets may be acceptable, but bombing a pizza parlor is unacceptable, right? One is terrorism, and the other is legitimate warfare, even if it's warfare that's done in a guerrilla fashion, right? We have terms for these things. And it seems to me one doesn't simply say in a kind of morally relativistic way, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? As if to suggest it's all of a piece. Yeah, a freedom fighter is someone who attacks a legitimate target, and a terrorist is someone who attacks indiscriminately, who attacks any target.
Exactly. Yeah. I think in any kind of military or violence context, that's exactly right. That's one of the big differences. And I think that really comes down to one of the bigger underlying differences between the kind of behavior you get from somebody with hero delusions, which tends to be ineffective and fringe in sort of an overall way. What I mean by that is that when somebody has a healthy heroic imagination, they're continuously trying to fit their own responses and capabilities into real-world problems. And that means that the more and more you develop your heroic imagination, the more practical and helpful your reactions become in a difficult situation. Somebody who has a healthy heroic imagination is the kind of person you want around in a really stressful and dangerous situation, because they're most likely to have already developed some of the skills, or at least just the level-headedness that's necessary to come up with practical, effective solutions, whether the immediate situation is a building that's on fire, or the ship that you're on is going down, or it's a workplace situation where a boss or a contractor is doing something that's unethical or illegal. They're likely to have a practical, realistic solution to that. That's why the heroic imagination leads to more heroic behavior when a difficult situation arises. Somebody with the hero delusion is in a fantasy world. They've constructed imaginary reasons for why they're not powerful and important, and for why they feel so downtrodden. They've cast themselves as a victim, even though they probably haven't been victimized by anybody, or at least not to the extent that they think they have been. And they're dealing with a very unrealistic view of why their problems exist in the first place. So when you're starting from an unrealistic worldview like that, it's very difficult to come up with realistic or practical solutions to any kind of problem. And that's why they tend to remain at the fringes of society and tend to remain marginalized, as Rodger was throughout his adulthood. He never achieved any kind of success in any field of life, not with his friends socially, not with women in terms of romance, not with his online persona, and not in any kind of career or anything like that. He really was just kind of like your down and out guy, and it wasn't that he was a victim of circumstance entirely. It was that the way he responded to the problems he encountered was by making up far-fetched reasons for why he was actually the victim, and then coming up with very unrealistic solutions like, well, if I shoot enough people, they'll get the message. So when you see somebody with the hero delusion acting on any kind of issue, even if it's a good cause, even if they have a good cause at heart, the example I gave in my blog post was, what if you care deeply about the environment? Well, somebody who has a heroic imagination is going to set out to try to make changes in how we treat the environment, or how much carbon we put out, or how much pollution we put into water. And when they start running into the real-world obstacles, it's very difficult to make environmental changes. There's a lot of political issues involved. There's a lot of money involved. Corporations have their say. And even the lobbying groups and environmental activist groups who are on your side often have very different visions of what should happen. When somebody with a healthy heroic imagination encounters that difficulty, they're going to start thinking about how to problem solve. And they might reach out to other environmentalists. They may build a coalition. They might realize a large organization is already doing the kind of work they want to do and join that organization instead of starting something new. But they tend to be able to communicate their ideas, and because they have, reasonable solutions, people will at least listen to them. And if they try hard enough, eventually they can actually make some traction. Now, somebody with a hero delusion who wants to save the environment is going to have no patience for any of this, because they're not able to look at all of those roadblocks and difficulties and assess them in a realistic manner. So instead, they come up with fantasy solutions. Well, if I bomb this one plant, that's going to shut down the whole power industry. Then we'll have to go back to a pre-technology era, And they come up with these dramatic sort of silver bullet solutions. And if I just do this, everybody will see what needs to change, and the whole world will be changed. And that's what Griffin saw in Rogers' manifesto, was that he really thought that this one tiny action, which is horrific on the scale of having killed a number of people, but on the global scale, it's relatively small. He thought that that one action was going to change sort of male-female relations across the nation and maybe across the world. That's just not realistic.
Right. And it seems to me that you see what you describe as a delusion in a number of situations, but in the case that we've been talking about, if you look at his manifesto or his videos or whatever, he routinely refers to himself as a gentleman. Right? He's so surprised that that women are not romantically interested in him, and they're interested in other people, and they're interested in the wrong sorts of men, because he is such a gentleman, right? And this while he's planning to indiscriminately murder people, right? It seems to me really no better example of the kind of delusional thinking than that. The other thing that kind of strikes me as you've been talking, and as I read your blog post, is that we see this in a number of situations, right? You mentioned environmental activism. It got me thinking in the last few days about gun rights activism, and in particular the open carry demonstrations, where people have been, they feel themselves and their rights to be threatened in some way that is not immediately apparent, and their response is to wander around the community, openly displaying semi-automatic weapons. It seems to me another of these kind of unrealistic ways of dealing with a kind of imagined problem. But I wonder, as I was thinking about that, I wonder whether we're just kind of cherry-picking examples of things we don't like mass murder or terroristic bombings related to environmental campaigns, or gun rights open carry demonstrations at Chipotle or at the playground. And so, we're picking things that we say, well, these are just things we don't prefer, right? I don't know. I don't think so, but it occurs to me that someone listening to this might say, aren't you just cherry picking things you don't like and then saying that's delusion, right? Rather than something else. Real heroism, people standing up for unpopular beliefs or what have you.
I think there's a message there, or a theme, that the delusional heroism, or that hero delusion, is very self-oriented, whereas the heroic imagination is outward focused. So I think there's a couple of other examples to bring in here, and one is I think it's as you were talking, Andre, I think I was remembering the initial response to Edward Snowden was to turn him into a delusional hero, one who was doing it for the attention, to make himself a hero, to get attention.
Narcissist.
A narcissist. Right. So that was the word and the image that was being sent out, and there's a reason for that, because that kind of vain attempt for heroism is frowned upon. The Achilles type, I suppose, of heroism. And then the other one that I mentioned to you guys yesterday or the day before was this revelation that Somali Imam, the fighter against sex trafficking in Cambodia, is that where she's from?
Yeah, correct.
Has just been exposed, and I'm not even sure that the report has come out. I think it's in Newsweek, that she fabricated her story, which kind of her origin story, how she became this hero of the sexually trafficked. And that again reminded me of this idea of the false hero story. And I think there are a lot of pressures involved there, and we can get into that in a minute, in the non-profit world and trying to raise money and raise attention. We certainly saw the same kind of thing happen with Greg Mortensen a couple of years ago, who wrote 3 Cups of Tea and started the Central Asia Institute to build schools in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And both of these people have clearly done good in the world, but both of them have had their origin story exposed as false, and the origin story is such an important part of their ability to raise funds. So it's this. There's a problem with that, and we don't know the reasons behind the falsification. It could have been this hero delusion idea where they see themselves as the savior, and so to be the savior, they need to explain their qualifications or whatever it might be to be that savior. But again, there's some fabrication there, internally, externally, or both. That's not just about helping others. There's something else going on there.
I think that, it's a messy world we live in, and obviously not everybody who is tinged with either heroism or scandal is going to fall into either the heroic imagination or the hero delusion camp. But I think it's important when we try to decide, well, how do we identify hero delusions? Is it just cherry picking? How widespread is it? But there are really 2, very clear signs of hero delusion that come out of Griffin's overall theory, and certainly you can see in the sort of the character portrait of somebody like Elliot Rodger. And if these 2 signs are present in anybody's actions, there's a pretty good bet that they're acting under at least some level of delusion. The first one is that they are convinced that a single dramatic action is all it's going to take to send the message they want to send or achieve the goal they want to achieve. Somebody with a heroic imagination is going to learn pretty quickly that oftentimes it takes years and years of hard and gradual work to make even just a small lasting change. But somebody with the hero delusion concocts a single dramatic moment, whether it's a killing spree like Elliot Rodgers or some other kind of action, and that one moment is going to change everything. The other thing that I think is extremely important in this is that people with a heroic imagination may be well equipped to handle heroic situations when they arise, but they don't go out seeking them. They are ready to act if needed, but they don't go out looking for a chance to play the hero. Whereas somebody with the hero delusion will actively seek out a time and a place where they can carry out this dramatic action that they want to carry out. And we see that very clearly with George Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin, that he was a neighborhood watchman, and that's a respectable volunteer thing to do. But he exceeded the duty and the position of neighborhood watch when he went and followed Trayvon Martin, even after the police had directly ordered him not to do so. He was not willing to just act heroically if he ran into a situation where it was needed. He actually went out following people, looking for a chance to act heroically. And the result, of course, was that he ended up killing an unknown teenager. And so those two criterion make a pretty good yardstick to hold up to anybody's actions to see, were they acting out of a sense of, preparedness and contemplation about how they can improve themselves, or were they acting out of a delusion that they're the central character in some kind of heroic setting? That applies really clearly to Elliot Rodger. I don't know how clearly it applies to Somali Mom, simply because we don't really have the kind of manifestos and videos of her explaining her motives like we have with Rodger. It could be that she made up the whole story because she planned to eventually become a celebrity of the nonprofit world and a famous international speaker. But it could also be like when so many people make up a heart-wrenching story that isn't true or isn't quite true. She might have simply wanted some attention or some sympathy, and she had no idea it was going to spiral into making her sort of in the spotlight. It's hard for us to say.
Well, I think going back to the Zimmerman example, wasn't it the case that he had been kicked off the Neighborhood Watch because he was too into it? Is that Ari? You probably saw more.
Is that accurate, Ari?
You know what? I don't know. I wrote about this, but it was a while ago, and I didn't dig into. I'll be honest. I did not dig into his Neighborhood Watch history. I wrote about it in the context of his rescue of the stranded motorist, or whatever that was, after he was released from after the Martin trial. So, my thoughts were very much in line with what Drew was saying, right? That this is someone who was actively going out into the world in the hope of being a hero, right? That he was looking for places in which he could insert himself so that he would be lauded, right? It may have been that he was overzealous as a member of the Neighborhood Watch. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if it turned out that was the case.
Right. Well, I think so. I think the conclusion here is that when people such as ourselves are encouraging people to be heroes, live heroic lives, prepare for heroism, that they're doing it for others, and that they understand that one single act is not going to change everything.
That's right. And we've been talking, it really bears repeating, right? What you say, Matt, is exactly right. And I think that this is the kind of thing we've been talking about for years now, but that every chance we get to reinforce it, I think, is really, we should take it. The idea of being other regarding, right? Looking outside oneself, focusing on other people with regard to your heroism, rather than saying, how can I bring sort of a glory to myself, or how can I sort out my own problem that I'm having. It seems to me that the motivation, and we've talked about this over and over again, but motivation is really, really crucial because it kind of sets the table for everything that you're doing, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that an important corollary of that, too, for anybody out there who is, exploring the heroic imagination or thinking about how we can create more heroism in the world, I don't know that somewhat proud or narcissistic or self-seeking instinct, it's not completely alien to any of us, Anybody who watches a hero movie and has a heroic imagination is going to put themselves for a moment in the role of the protagonist who saves everybody in a giant final climax of the movie, which is a single dramatic action, the way we see with these delusions, right? And it's not abnormal for us to think about, wouldn't it be, amazing to be like that? What if I was Superman? If I was Spider-Man? Hopefully not Captain America, but I'll take what I can get. But that instinct has to be tempered, and the heroic imagination itself is a powerful force to do that. I know that when I first started, pursuing the idea of heroism and wondering how is heroism made, I certainly, a long time to come to the acceptance that it's going to be slow going, that you make small, gradual, positive differences, and that there's not just some brilliant theory or some great deed or something like that somebody can go out to do that's going to have world-shaking, positive effects. It takes a while to accept that. And one of the reasons I was able to kind of make that realization was because I spent so much time contemplating, well, how do I live up to these standards? How do I get myself ready to make a difficult choice in a risky situation for somebody else? More of my time was spent contemplating and reflecting upon my own capabilities, and less time sort of dreaming up what I wanted the rest of the world to be like. And that's the heroic imagination at work. So the more you can cultivate that pro-social heroic imagination, the more you'll start to temper that sense of ego or self-seekingness or glory. And it can be simple things. Phil Zimbardo recommends just simply making a point to compliment other people around you more often, because it makes you start thinking about other people's needs and their good qualities and how you can make their day a little bit better. And it gets you outside of your own head toward other people.
I don't know if I've got much more to say. I think that's a great summary, and I think, again, as people that are writing about heroism, I think we have to be alert to people who are approaching it from the wrong angle, maybe seeking advice on preparing for heroism, etc., but doing it for the glory or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Matt. I think what this does, this conversation, and the blog post that was up on roguepriest.net, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
And we'll link to it in our show notes.
It's the best website on the internet. It just doesn't get any better than that one.
That's right.
I read it every day.
Your one-stop shop. But what that really reinforced for me, and the reason that I think we wanted to have this conversation, is it really demonstrates how important it is to think very critically about what it is we're talking about. Because this term gets batted about, this idea of heroism, so much in popular culture, in media, in the news, because it's the tendency to have it, to allow it to remain so ill-defined. The precision that we're aiming at, I think, is absolutely critical. This kind of highlights it, right? Because you can go so far wrong. It seems to me so important to have serious conversations about what it is we're talking about. Because people can say, you know what, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to right all of the injustices of the world, and so on. I saw it in the movies, or I read it on this website, and everyone's going to remember who I am. And it seems to me that there's a potential for such danger. There's a potential for people to go very far wrong. And so having these conversations, having this sort of conference, Matt, that you planned last year and that you're planning again for this fall, those are precisely the opportunities that we really need to make the most of, and that I think that I think we're dedicated to making the most of.
I agree with that. I also think it's good for people to know that although certainly there are people who will misunderstand heroism or appropriate the same hero mythos to bad ends. It's important to know, and I think it's somewhat good to know, that there is a fundamental difference. There's two different psychological impulses, between somebody who has a heroic imagination and wants to do good in the world versus someone who has a hero delusion. They're easy to tell apart. They come from a different place, and they're marked by very different kinds of actions even before things become extreme. And one of the best ways to just, if you're ever not sure, about your own, wish for heroism or about somebody else's, I think a good simple litmus test is how social is it. Most of the people with hero delusions that we hear about in the news are acting as loners, or at best they have a small group of people with a fringe philosophy. Whereas if you start off by doing volunteer work, or by joining a larger nonprofit group or something like that, you have immediately a greater level of transparency. You have other people who are double checking your ideas, and you're immediately working in a sort of pro-social and let's communicate this to others kind of manner, which tempers off that tendency toward delusional behavior. So the more social we can make it, I think that's really where the good training ground for heroism is. And it's really when somebody's concocting schemes in their basement or their gun closet, that's when we start to get ideas that are dangerous.
And I think you can, if you're unsure about whether your heroism is social or private, you can just email us and we'll tell you whether you're on the road to heroism or not.
There is a fee for that, though. We will charge you.
See, and I always say, just ask yourself, what would Socrates do?
Or you can ask, what would Ari do?
Right.
Right. The answer will not even cost you, $5.95. You can send me a note free of charge.
There you go. Well, I think we can sign off here and hope that this is a revival of the Hero Report for 2014.
I think this one dramatic podcast has changed the entire world.
That's right. When we go, we've been, of course, broadcasting live, but we will now podcast it, so it will be available on iTunes. And once it is available on iTunes, I presume that we will have changed the world, because, of course, our strategy here in doing this is entirely other regarding. Yeah, we are hoping to make things better for everyone. We have no thought to our own good, but only the good of others, and so we're in good shape.
I actually spend several hours a day thinking about my own good, but I try to also think about the good of others as well. It's a balancing act.
There you are, Matt. You now have the day stretching out ahead of you. On the other hand, I have to get myself to sleep, and but maybe I'll watch Game of Thrones before I nod off, so that I'll know what happens before anyone can tell me.
A respectable strategy, sir.
What I do. Everyone, thank you for making it through this podcast. Hopefully, we'll have many more such late night heroic ramblings to come in the near future. Gentlemen, thank you both. It's been a pleasure. It's nice to reconnect with both of you, even at this late or early hour, where in the world you happen to be. And we'll do it again soon.